only thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. Thanks for joining us today. Visit our website at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com, looking at things from both a biblical and a historical point of view. David Barton, the big part of what we do here is trying to figure out how did America become so successful? What's the formula? And how do we preserve and protect it? If we've had a lot of success in our nation's history and we want that going forward, we need to figure out what that formula is. And clearly our free enterprise system has been a big part of our success and certainly changed the entire world and created more wealth and prosperity and progress. But how did we get there? Where did we get this idea of free enterprise?
Well, you're right. Free market system is one of the things that does characterize America. We are unique from other nations with free market system. And if you look at economics, there's all sorts of systems. There's a free market, there's a command, there's a mixed economy. They have all this different economics, but we have a unique system. Now, the question becomes, how long have we had that system? When did we get it, and what started it? And I know what I would say if I had been through university any time in recent years. I mean, if I asked you who today do universities identify as the father of the free market system, do you know?
Wow, so we're talking left-leaning professors, I'm sure. Who would they claim?
Professors who haven't done very much research. Oh, that is left-leaning. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to repeat myself.
Let's see. I don't know. They would. I don't know. Maybe they try to put it. They might even go. Put it on the founding fathers. That would be at least an attempt to go in the right direction, and they wouldn't realize it came before that, but. I don't know. Who do they give it to?
See, what they give it to is, well, it's not an American thing. It's a British thing. They put it to economist Adam Smith, and Adam Smith in 1776 is the guy who wrote The Wealth of Nations. And so they call Adam Smith the father of the free market system. So if the free market made America unique, it wasn't our idea. We got it from a British guy in 1776, and because we got it in 1776, that's what's made us unique. And, of course, my question is, well, then what economic system did America have before 1776?
And where did Adam Smith get the idea?
And if they say Adam Smith is the guy who is the basis of that system, and by the way, they often talk about how he is the one who influenced the founding fathers. Really? You mean the founding fathers they didn't have a concept of a free market system until after 1776? And by the way, when a book comes out, it takes a few years for it to penetrate and get into thinking. Let's say 10 years. So by 1786, if the founding fathers bought totally into everything Adam Smith said, what did we have for an economic system before 1786? And was it not a free market before that? And nobody ever asked those questions, and the professors never answered them. And so because they don't like American exceptionalism, because they don't like America being unique, we obviously got our ideas from everybody else. There's no way we could have come up with something on our own because we're just backwoods guys from America. I mean, if we can just be sophisticated like Europe, then maybe we can really be something someday. But this is the nonsense of that. We've had a free market system, or at least degrees of it, operating in America since way back at the time of the Pilgrims. And so that predates Adam Smith by more than a century easily. And then you take beyond that even at the time Adam Smith was doing his work in 1776 with The Wealth of Nations, and it doesn't become a real influential book till several years later, we already had a pretty strong economic system going in America that was free market. It was creating prosperity like crazy across the colonies. That's why so many foreign nations wanted to come and take American colonies, whether it was Spain or whether it was France or others. Great Britain sure didn't want to let go of us because we were the one thing producing economic gain in all of their colonies. America is really filling their coffers in a lot of ways. And so where did we get that? Man, well, that's what people fail to recognize is you have to go back to the early roots of this. And when you do, you go back to the Pilgrims, which means you go back to the Bible. And so as you look at the Pilgrims, one of the famous stories in their own writings is how they moved from socialism, moved away from socialism. Now, they would not have called it free market back then, but they started using free market principles, and they talk about that in their own writings. But because we do this, and this is a Foundation of Freedom Thursday, and we're looking at the origins and the roots and the foundations of the American Constitution, et cetera, part of which is economic, this is one of the things that we have to look at. And we actually got a great question in on this about the Pilgrims and their economic
and David,
system.
just real quick, before you go to that question, this is not to say, obviously, Adam Smith's stuff is great, and you talk a lot about the book that came in addition to Wealth of Nations and the biblical foundations that even he points to. So we're not dissing on Adam Smith. We're just saying that wasn't the beginning.
That's right. Adam Smith is not the guy who invented this. Adam Smith took the principles, as Thomas Paine used to say, all the principles of science are of divine origin. Man cannot invent or contrive. He can only discover those principles. Same with economics. The principles of economics that work are of divine origin. You mean to tell me that way back in Israel, they didn't already understand the free market system long before the time of Christ? Sure they did. Because the principles they had, the Jewish system has been a free market system for a long time, long before Adam Smith wrote his work. So Adam Smith didn't discover new principles. He articulated some things very well, but he goes back to earlier principles. As you mentioned, the book that he did on the theory of moral sentiments, which shows the moral and religious foundation on which he built the free market system. So that's where you have to go back to, and that's what one of the questions that we got recently asked. And we thought, let's go to the Pilgrim historian, the premier guy, Paul Jehle, and let's ask him the question that we got asked, and let the premier historian on the Pilgrims talk about some of the origins of that free market system, where it came from.
Dr. Paul Jehle, our guest, when we return here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Federal courts have made several amazing rulings recently, ordering the removal of a cross from a cemetery, banning religious holiday displays, removing the Ten Commandments from public view, prohibiting student prayers whether verbal or silent, and numerous other similar restrictive rulings. As one current justice has noted, the Supreme Court has now become, quote, a national board of theology. Our founding fathers would be astounded. They designed the First Amendment to keep the federal courts completely out of this issue. As Thomas Jefferson forcefully declared, I consider the federal government as prohibited by the Constitution from meddling with religious exercises. The First Amendment was designed to keep decisions on religious expression out of the federal courts and in the hands of the local communities.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Our guest today, our good friend, Dr. Paul Jehle. Dr. Jehle, always good to have you, sir.
Well, great to be here.
Hey, listen, by the way, listeners, if you haven't had a chance to go on a tour with Dr. Jehle, you got to do that. If you haven't had him into your church to speak, you got to do that. We're going to have links today where you can find out more, but absolutely one of the best experts in the country on the Pilgrims and so much about American history and our economic system. And Dr. Jehle, that's why David said you got to get Paul on. We got to ask him about this listener question we got.
Okay.
So you're in the hot seat today.
That's all right.
All right. Well, here's our question that came in from a listener. It has to do with the Pilgrims. It said, did the original Pilgrims completely fulfill their contract with the merchants using the socialistic process, or did they renegotiate the free market process with the merchants, or just change to a free market on their own and pay off the debt? Now, I think, and you know better than I do, Dr. Jehle, but I think this is coming from from the standpoint of them switching from the, everybody take from the storehouse model to, hey, everybody's going to have their own property. And so what did that have to do with their contract with the merchants? And I'll just toss it to you. Tough question.
To begin with, people need to recognize that in the time Pilgrims left England, England was moving in a socialistic manner. Economics from a socialistic perspective was the norm. It was not out of the ordinary. And so you actually had common fields in England that everyone worked, and you had kind of very vague boundaries between them. So this was a common thing. So when the contractors, which were called the adventurers, and these were investors, it's like they formed a joint stock company in order to finance their voyage. Think of it. Here's church people. They sell all their lands, and they sell their homes, and they sell their businesses and everything, and then they're going to finance this voyage. They had to rent the Mayflower. They had to rent a complete crew. They purchased the Speedwell and, of course, lost that. They never made it to the New World. So they lost a ton of money just in the few months they were negotiating the contract. But the investors, the businessmen, were called adventurers. The Pilgrims and the others on the Mayflower, besides the Pilgrim Church, were called planters. And this was a joint stock company, which meant each individual adult had a share. Father of a family had the shares for the rest of his family, his wife and children. And so they would come over, and the goal was that people would get a return on their investment. Now, you and I know the way a stock market operates today. You see, you're not guaranteed a profit.
Right.
If the company goes down, you go down with it. We have to realize that when England started to explore over here to the New World, they were pioneering new methods economically. They were branching out, and they were all trying things that would work. And, of course, the adventurers wanted to make sure that they had a profit, so they wanted to make sure that they, in one sense, it was not an even keel. They would want to take everything the Pilgrims got in profit. Because at this time, and for the next 50 to 60 years, Puritans would preach sermons against making a profit. The whole idea was if you're a Christian, you gave to the common store and you did not take anything for yourself. And this would go on even in New England with Puritan colonies up through the 1670s and 80s. Not until the early 1700s did the free enterprise idea really take root. And that's because when they came over to the New World in the wilderness, they had just the Bible to work from. They don't have the Church of England. They don't have the king. And because of that, slowly but surely, if you go right to the Scriptures, you're going to come up with a free enterprise concept of economics, of each individual, because everyone's a winner in the marketplace.
Isn't that interesting that once they got away from everybody else's interpretation of Scripture and control of Scripture and actually got to the Scripture, they moved away from socialism and to free enterprise? Going to take a quick break here. Paul Jehle is our guest. Stay with us here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Our founding fathers, despite their common love for America, did not always agree with each other in politics. Such was the case between John and Samuel Adams. John was the leader of the Federalist Party, and Samuel was a leader of the Anti-Federalist Party. Consequently, political disagreements were not unusual between these two. On October the 4th, 1790, Sam wrote John and told him, "Let ministers and philosophers, statesmen and patriots unite their endeavors to renovate the age by educating their little boys and girls and leading them in the study and practice of the exalted virtues of the Christian system." 2 weeks later, John wrote back and told Samuel that on this issue they both agreed. While these two prominent founding fathers disagreed on much, they both agreed on the importance of educating the next generation in the principles of Christianity.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Dr. Paul Jehle is our guest, and we've been talking about what the Pilgrims went through in terms of their application of Scripture. And, Paul, I thought it was interesting right before the break, you were talking about that, when they were actually being told what the Scripture says, then they were into, basically socialism and communism. But when they actually went to the Scripture themselves, they discovered free enterprise and actually implemented free enterprise.
Exactly. And so, but to get right to the question, people have to realize this. So the Pilgrims were under a 7-year contract. They borrowed 1,200 to 1,600 pounds. At that time, it was a huge sum. And that's renting everyone and, the Mayflower and the crew and everything else. And, of course, when the Mayflower goes back, they had a big challenge because how are they going to pay off the debt? Now, they barely were alive. Half of them had died. The Mayflower goes back with not one Pilgrim returning in April of 1621. And when the businessmen get there, they say, well, thanks for sending the Mayflower back, but where's all the stuff loaded in it to pay off your debt? And, the idea was that somehow they would come and sift for gold and these Pilgrims were starving, and they had no way to do that. And so it put this adverse relationship because these businessmen wanted a quick turn. Now, who doesn't? And so what happens is by 1623, Bradford recognizes that there's no way they're going to pay back anything. They're not going to make any money at all unless they internally change the contract, sort of without permission, and which is what they did. Every man had their own garden then in 1623, and This is when the birth of free enterprise comes, and you'd look at it and say, Pilgrims are pretty obvious in Plymouth Plantation. They do it because they go back to the Bible, and secondarily, necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, they're dying. They got to figure out a better way to grow corn, and they triple their production the first year they go to free enterprise. So they realized that this was going to be a tremendous increase, and that internal change began to help them pay off that debt. In fact, by 1625, they got land in Maine and started another trading post up in Maine, and Maine was actually a part of Plymouth Colony, what is now Maine. For several years, they had a trading post up there, and they would fur trade was the key. Now, most people aren't aware of this, but one of the things that saved the Pilgrims in making enough profit was because of the absolute craze in England for new fashionable hats. And the best kind of material to make the hats were the beaver pelts that could be found in New England. And so the Pilgrims would do this. They would trade with the Native Americans, and this trade with the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, and of course they aren't using the money of England, has no value, but they use wampum and other aspects of trade. So by 1625, they have a little bit of hope. Now, in 1626, they're getting close to renegotiating that contract, so they start a year early to renegotiate it. And what they try to do is they don't want to stay on the same kind of situation they've been under. So they have a group of undertakers. Now, undertakers today, we think of funerals, but in this case, these are individuals who are some of the leaders of the Pilgrims. Every male household is doing okay. They divide the debt among everyone, and they buy out the investors. So in essence, the answer to that question is their free enterprise, private property move inch by seed form in those first 7 years allows them to buy out their debt from the adventurers. Now, of course, they still owed all that debt to the people that have assumed it. And literally, that's for another 6 years. And they go on, and eventually, by 1640-41, some say by 1642, the Pilgrims were completely out of debt and, of course, get absorbed by the Massachusetts Bay Colony by 1692. But so the answer to that question is yes, in a way that there's no question that the free enterprise, but remember, the Pilgrims were not completely under free enterprise because of the context of England and their constant contacts with businessmen. But here's the interesting thing. The interesting lesson we can learn is you stick someone in a wilderness without tyrannical control, and their only manual they're trying to follow is the Bible. Notice which way they eventually go.
Yeah. Do you think they would have, had they not made that change, would they have ever been able to get out of debt?
They probably would, but the problem is the merchant adventurers were, they were Christians, but the Pilgrims said they were financial businessmen first and Christians second. And they kept raising their interest rates because, any businessman wants to recover all his loss. And most colonies are not really financially productive, especially when you send families over. Now, they'll eventually, long-term, that's your best bet.
Yeah.
But short-term, it doesn't always bring that profit. So the 7-year period was not the easiest. But, of course, remember, the 7-year period, again, all of these ideas of 7-year loans, and they come from the Bible. That's out of biblical law. I mean, the idea of 7-year loans and loans that are in those numeric, it's very key that both in England and in America we have a lot of that pattern economically. But so the answer to the question would be yes, they'd switch over to internal aspects of free enterprise in 1623, no question, gave them a greater idea of decentralizing, opening trading posts. They would give, now it's partial though too, because they would give government monopoly to these trading posts because they're following the pattern that they've been brought up with and had in England.
Yeah, it took a long time to actually get to true free enterprise.
It takes a long time. I mean, economics is one of the last areas that gets reformed in a nation when a nation gets discipled, and yet it's necessity. Too, you have to survive. So you go to the scriptures and you want to follow that, but at the same time, man, you've got to eat. So what works? And that's where they come up with a free enterprise over and over again.
What is the best resource? You have so many good things. What's the best resource for folks that want to know more about economics itself and learning economic lessons from the Bible and from the Pilgrims?
Well, right. I would say that, of course, Of Plymouth Plantation by the Pilgrims themselves is good, but even when they discuss their economics, it may not be that easily understood by people today. I know that I have 2 or 3 articles on the economics of the Pilgrims in the Patriot Bible. There's several articles on that which give a bibliography of sources you can go to.
All right, good stuff, good stuff. And then your website is tntchurch.net?
Well, that's my brother pastor is, but it's plymrock.org, plymrock.org for the Plymouth Rock Foundation, where they can get more sources, information, and even my economics course that's online.
All right, we're going to have both links to those websites today at wallbuilderslive.com. Dr. Jehle, always great to have you, brother. God bless you.
All right, God bless.
Back in a moment with David Barton.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Special thanks to Dr. Paul Jehle for his time today as well, and a life of study on the Pilgrims. It's always great to get somebody that spent that much time studying these guys, and like you said at the beginning, David, the foremost expert on the Pilgrims.
He is. He's the official historian for there in Plymouth, Mass. It's really significant. He made some really cool statements. He pointed out that the Pilgrims had to get out from under the influence of their culture in order to discover what was in the Bible. I thought, boy, that's really true. You know, even today, we still think through the lens of what we've been taught and what our culture teaches us. And the Pilgrims were able to remove themselves and get into it in a biblical sense, and they got out from under the adventurers and those who had funded them and began to look at it. And I thought it was really cool that he said that, you know, when they get to the point of using those free market principles, that they tripled production within the first year they use them. Well, that's a pretty good indication of where they came from. They get in the Bible, they find these principles, they put them into practice, and they really work. So there you have a lot of the origin of the free market system long before Adam Smith was doing stuff in 1776. And so the Pilgrims, as Paul pointed out, you know, over the subsequent years, they refined a lot of this. That it became more free market as they went along. And so it's a growing system. And so by the time we get to the time of the Founding Fathers, it has really developed in a lot of ways. And, you know, Paul was talking even early 1700s, it still wasn't fully developed, but it was still developing. So you look at the free market economic system, America had a very good, very prosperous one long before Adam Smith came along. And and even to this day, the American free market system is very different from other free market systems that are out there. But ours is changing very rapidly. And I was real disappointed to see in the last election with so many initiatives where the people voted to give government control of businesses in a number of areas. By definition, if you look up free market or free market economy, free enterprise system, by definition it says free from government regulation. That's what has made us so unique is government doesn't run business. Government's not good at running economics, period. Look at the debt, look at the spending, look at what they do, and we're going to give them control of private business as well. And so 4 states said, hey, we in government want to tell every employer what they have to pay their employee. We passed 4 of those initiatives. Now, I'll tell you the golden rule principle. Nobody would want the government to come into their home and say, hey, we're going to tell you how much you have to pay your kids in an allowance. And we're going to tell you how much money you have to give each spouse, husband and wife, how much you have to say. We would all object, but yet those voters voted to let government go in and tell businesses what they had to pay employees.
But isn't that based on, you know, just a great track record? I mean, government is so good at running things,
exactly,
and making good decisions about
that's my
employees,
point.
And they never waste money, or there's never fraud or corruption.
They're so efficient. They're the model of. I mean, you would want the government to run every business you ever started based on their track record. Not hardly. And so then
just spend a little time at the post office or the DMV and then say, is that how I want government to get every business in America working like that?
And we should recognize that, and every single time we see any initiative come up in any state that is going to let the government regulate business, we should vote no on principle basis. because we also had states that said, well, we want the government to tell that every employer they have to set aside so many 6 days, so many vacation days. No, you want to be able to go negotiate that. One of the companies I help run, we set aside 20 paid days right now. Well, that state that just passed an initiative said you got to have 6 days vacation. I go, great. I'll get 14 days back. I'm going to drop my employees down from 20 down to 6 because the government said only 6. No. My employees are a whole lot better off when the government stays out of it because they get 3 times as many vacation days. And by the way, if they don't like 20, they can go down the road and see if somebody will give them 25. They can go down that road and see if somebody will give them 31. And they may find out everybody else out there only gives you 3 days, except my company, which gives you 20. Whatever it is. And so that competitive thing is what makes us so special. And that's anytime we have an initiative, and we had a bunch of them this year, and they passed because people are thinking, oh, let's sock it to the other guy. We're going to stand up for the workers. No, the workers need to stand up for themselves. And usually when the government gets involved, the government takes over the workers and the work supply, and you lose both of them as a result. So what the Pilgrims have taught us is very, very good. What Paul did in setting that forth is really good stuff. We need to keep going back to those principles. It is the Bible that produced our economic freedom. We need to go back to those principles, keep them that way today.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Be sure and get on Dr. Paul Jehle's website. We'll have a link today at wallbuilderslive.com. Get these resources, another great source of information on the Pilgrims in that time frame in economics is also Stephen McDowell's Providence Foundation. We'll have a link to that as well today at wallbuilderslive.com. Thanks for listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided.